Hello, and welcome to Basic Folk, where we have honest conversations with folk musicians on the Bluegrass Situation Podcast Network. It is me, Cindy Howes, the host of this podcast. Thanks for joining us. Before we get into Rising Appalachia, let's talk about you and us. The best way to stay in touch with Basic Folk, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter at basicfolk.com. That's the best way. You can also follow us on social media. We're active on Instagram especially and Facebook at Basic Folk Pod. You can also make a contribution. We're a listener-supported podcast. You can give $5 a month at our store, and you can get a Basic Folk beanie that is handmade by my mom, has a little Basic Folk tag on it. We're heading into the fall season, so maybe, check it out. Basicfolk.com, click on the shop. Okay, let's get into it. Sisters Leah Song and Chloe Smith grew up in urban Atlanta. They also lived in New Orleans and outside of Asheville. The pair are deeply rooted in their Southern identity as evidenced in their band Rising Appalachia. Although their parents are not professional musicians, music was a constant part of the family. Their parents were dedicated students of early Appalachian music. The sisters played music every day, were classically trained, attended fiddle camps and music festivals, among other musical activities. The sisters developed their own taste in Atlanta's 90s rap underground scene, and there was a time when the two didn't want anything to do with their parents' music. However, eventually, they came back to it and decided to pursue Appalachian music, thanks to some time spent away living in Mexico. Aside from music, activism and purpose remain very important to Rising Appalachia. Leah's idea for the slow music movement came out of the desire to sustain the troubadour lifestyle over participating in a traditional touring musician industrial complex. While touring, the band requests local food in their rider, invite tabling from nonprofits, and work to create relationships with the local community. They also will seek out alternative methods of transportations, trains, or smaller vehicles that use non-fossil fuels. Rising Appalachia has been known to do hub shows where they stay for a few days and create relationships with the community. This past July, they hosted Catalyst, their first annual music, art, and education festival in Asheville. Leah and I dug into how being musicians helped them create a space where artists felt welcome and taken care of. We also talk about Chloe's new baby and how touring might look different this fall. Check them out and their latest album, live at Preservation Hall. We're going to hear a song from that release, Stand Like an Oak, and then we'll get to our conversation with Leah Song of Rising Appalachia. Leah, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me and subsequently us.
So I am a Northerner, and I'm going to say the name of your band incorrectly. I'm pretty sure at some point in this interview, but Rising Appalachia.
Well, you're not wrong, but that is the Northern way to pronounce it.
Oh, wait. So how do you pronounce it?
Here in the South, we pronounce it Appalachia.
Appalachia.
And my godmother always used to say the way to remember is to just think of throwing an apple at you.
Okay, I'll never forget it now.
Exactly.
So you and your sister Chloe, who's 4 years younger than you, grew up in the South in urban Atlanta, and you've lived there, New Orleans, and outside of Asheville. You are deeply rooted in your identity as Southerners. Can we start by hearing from you, like in good times and bad, what it means to be from the South?
Totally. Yep. We spend so much time kind of ruminating and thinking on that question because you nailed it. You know, we consider ourselves very Southern in a sort of a trifecta of the South. So we understand three very different regions of deep Southern identity. And I think that having that kind of trinity of identity has been very nurturing and very vital for us. The urban South that we grew up in was a concrete jungle in many ways, but full of very rich Georgia-based culture, music, you know, thunderstorms and crickets and everything from the blues to underground hip hop to the incredible fiddle and banjo music that was coming out of our family home. And then we spent a lot of time in Southern Appalachia as children. Our mother is a traditional Appalachian folk fiddler. Our parents played in a contradance band. Our godmother, who I mentioned already, you know, is an incredible fiddler, and her and our godfather were an incredible Zydeco duo. So there was like this rich kind of cultural identity as kids straddling the urban and the rural South. And then we moved down to New Orleans and spent about 7 years down there and really, I think, kind of came to understand our purpose and our duty in a way as musicians through New Orleans, through the New Orleans reverence of music. And we came down as guests, and we came down to really support the rebuilding that was going on post-Katrina, and then found in that space just this incredible reverence of folk music and reverence of music, period, like nowhere, I think, on planet Earth. And really began to get our footing, you know, as folk musicians, as sisters that were coming through a lineage and a family tradition of music, which is something that is taken really seriously in Louisiana. And we started busking down there a lot. We would bike to the French Quarter and sit around with our instruments and try old traditional songs, try sort of folk renditions of old ballads, and test out our own songwriting and just get a hold of musicianship down there. And I think through that trifecta, through that process of three Southern identities, it locked in. It made a lot of sense for us. I think we always have felt a little bit outsiders when we're in entirely urban spaces, and also outsiders when we're in entirely rural spaces. But I think understanding kind of the pulse of all of those personalities of the South has given us a lot of ballast and a lot of pride. And, you know, we've always talked about Southern identity as something that we want to be able to uplift the really positive and really culturally rich parts, because it's plagued with incredibly hard and harsh stereotypes, some of them very well deserved, obviously. But there's also a rich cultural underbelly of kind of radical change makers and fantastically laid back, brilliant artists that have come kind of pulsing out of the slow, hot, sweaty, you know, complicated South. And I think we're always trying to be the storytellers of the parts of Southern identity that aren't told as much.
Cool. Your parents are not professional musicians, but it was a constant part of your family as they were like dedicated students of early Appalachian music. How'd we do with that pronunciation?
Yeah, you did it.
Okay,
nice.
Appalachian music. The music scene in your family involved playing music every day. You and your sister had classical and jazz training, fiddle camps, music festivals, hootenannies at your house, a bit of ethnomusicology from your mom's taping musicians to learn songs. Where did your parents' devotion to music come from? Like, what's been the history of music in their lives?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, our mother would scoff at us for saying musicology, but really, I mean, absolutely, she has been kind of a front porch musicologist our whole lives, and she just got deeply, deeply obsessed and immersed in the fiddle traditions when we were little kids. We trained and studied a little bit of music, but to be totally honest, we were kind of like the rugrat kids that got hauled around behind our parents' passion for a lot of these traditions. And, you know, we didn't think any differently of it as kids. We didn't know that was any different, you know, and as we grew up, we were like, oh, how fascinating to have been raised with such a rich, you know, both of our parents were students of the music. And so we were raised watching them learn. And our mom, you know, she was playing in like a jazz piano ensemble, and she was playing the hammered dulcimer for a while. And she was just kind of doing hobby music when we were little. When I was born, I found out recently I was conceived on a small tour that she was on. I was like, well, that's appropriate. But then I think when she got to Georgia and you know, really started realizing that her identity was going to be tied into the South. You know, she's from Virginia, but she moved down to Georgia. She wanted to understand more of the traditions of the region. And I think her kind of inner historian got in there, and she picked up the fiddle, I think, when I was about 3 years old. And she still plays 5, 6, 7 hours a day sometimes. Wow. And she picked it up when we were little, and she just wanted to know everything about Appalachian music she could possibly find out. And the story is pretty fun. When we were young, her first love was the Irish fiddle, and we went over to Ireland, and I have a memory of her. She always had a little tape recorder, and we would go into the pubs in Ireland where everyone is welcome. You know, the pubs are the community centers of Ireland, and she would record all these Irish fiddlers. And one day, one of these fiddlers asked us where we were from, and she said, "Oh, I'm from Georgia." Just almost brushed it off. And this old man said, "Oh, you know, the most beautiful music comes from Georgia." You know, in his thick, grovelly Irish accent. And I think that really marked for her a real different understanding of her home, of place. And she did. She took us back to Atlanta, to the house we were born and raised in, and she proceeded to become obsessed with Appalachian folk music. And she started a couple of bands. They would practice in our living room many days a week on all the old contra dance tunes. And then she would kind of haul us and our dad to every Southern Appalachian folk music festival that she could find. And we would camp out. And, you know, she had a day job that she didn't love that much. And so I think she found so much pleasure in devoting her free time into this kind of cultural revival in a way.
What impact has her drive to learn had on you and the way that you learn music or the way that you learn anything?
Yeah, Chloe and I are always laughing, you know, because we have this big band and it's, you know, many albums under our belt and lots of stages and lots of success in the grand scheme of a working musician. But our mother can play circles around both of us. And she will always be able to play circles around both of us. And her commitment to the craft is just, it will be a goal for us forever. We have mastered a presence of stage, you know, and an ability to read a crowd or read a room. And I think we put together a real special craft with our music. But she is, you know, always going to be a role model for us in how she could care less about performing. You know, she wants to know how many bowing styles there are between Kentucky and Georgia and Alabama for this one fiddle tune. She wants to know every piece of the technique, you know, and so we will always bow down to her dedication, and she's always allowed to tell us if the D tune is slightly out of key or if we've gotten something wrong in the B part. She gets first. She's like the first listener on any of our albums to kind of make sure it's tight.
So your mom had a day job, and it seems like your dad was the primary caretaker for you growing up?
Yeah. Sometimes we send Happy Mother's Day cards to our dad also.
Yeah, it's unfortunately still pretty rare to have a man be the one who stays home and raises the children.
Yeah.
What did that look like for your family, and how did you feel about it then? How do you feel about it now?
I mean, I think we really lucked out on our family unit. You know, it wasn't perfect by any means. There was all kinds of complications to our home life, like any family, but it was really, really loving and creatively intact. And I think our dad is a very brilliant folk artist. And had he had it his way, he would have really liked to have been a professor of art and wanted to be and tried to be for many years. And later on in life did get a stint as a professor after we had graduated, but he wasn't able to find that work. And so my mom had to hold the job, and our father became our primary caretaker at home. And it was real special. You know, I look back at it and I'm like, oh, I feel like we're very lucky that he wasn't able to be career driven, even though he may have wanted to be. We really benefited from it, Chloe and I, because we had this fantastically engaged father who was a wonderfully imaginative, quirky, creative man, and poured all of the energy that he may have wanted to put into, you know, an art job straight into his daughters. He just poured all of it into us. We had a very elaborate costume making seasons around Halloween where we could build anything and he would help us. You know, he had a master's degree in sculpture, so we could build. We won every Halloween costume in our costume contest forever because we had a master's degree sculptor in our house building us dragons and eyeballs and all sorts of things. And, you know, and he was able to kind of be our coach on the soccer field, and he would come in and help at the public school we went to. He would walk us to school every day. So, you know, he has been to this day still such an engaged father figure. And I do think that that's sadly so rare. And we benefited so much from having kind of like the matriarch that was working and like scholastic and studying all this, and then our brilliant, quirky father who was like making beans and rice and trying to figure out how to cut our hair. And, you know, it worked really well for us. I'm sure that my parents would both have totally different perspectives to offer you. But I think Chloe and I feel like our upbringing was real special and really, really creatively intact. And, you know, they still live in the same home that we were born and raised in. So it's full of all of my father has the studio downstairs, all of the art and paintings and sculptures that he makes. And our mother has the music studio upstairs. And we just love to be there. It's like being in the nest of all their creativity and kind of returning to all these things that really shaped us before we knew what we were doing.
Your mom still plays, you said 5 to 7 hours a day.
Yeah, she's obsessed.
When you and Chloe come to visit, when all four of you are together, where is music now? Yeah,
totally. We have a lot of family traditions still where we're all still intact, and we all show up with boxes of art supplies and bags of instruments. And we know that if we're all going to hang out for us, you know, we do probably 4 or 5 times a year we just pick a location and we all pile in. And we do all of these things. We work on art together, and then we work on music together. And, you know, sometimes we'll bring lyrics and work on 3-part harmonies with our mom, or we'll bring all the fiddle and banjo and guitar things and see if she can help us learn some more tunes. I mean, she's really helped bring a lot of the tunes to us. And I'd say it's like 50-50. We'll do music for half the time, and we'll do art for half the time, and then we'll like bake pies. It's rather Brady Bunchy sometimes over there, but kind of like Brady Bunch meets Mad Max. We get very weird. But
great!
That's what we do when we get together.
Like most any kid, you rebelled against your parents' music for a time. So you and Chloe both developed your own taste and really got into Atlanta's 90s rap underground.
Definitely.
Like, you didn't want anything to do with your mom and dad's music and were kind of embarrassed by it.
Definitely.
Eventually, you both came back to it and decided to pursue Appalachian music. How do you think that like rebellion, embarrassed era of your lives has impacted the way you feel about the musicians that you are?
Yeah, I mean, well, for starters, I think we were incredibly impacted and in love with the underground hip hop culture. And I would say still to this day, that stands as one of our contemporary folk traditions. And I know that there's always a lot of debates around that, but you know, the front porch personality of the rhymes and the storytelling of good underground hip hop and even good commercial hip hop, which is very different than what I think is popularized as like gangster rap, which is arguably, you know, can be kind of detrimental. But the lyricism and the underground culture of hip hop is potent storytelling. And we don't all agree about that. Our mother does not agree with us. But for us, it's been a huge impact as part of our lives. The humor, the storytelling, the rhythm, that sense that you can actually make music out of a set of spoons and some buckets and your voice, and that is also an instrumentation. You know, that is a tradition that comes out of the hip hop culture and that comes out of the South. That is powerfully similar to old Appalachian folk music. It's the poor music, it's the front porch music, it's the music of the oppressed, it's the music of that has nothing to do with being commercialized, that has to do with telling stories and making sure memories are held. So I give a huge shout out to hip hop culture and the impact that it's made on music traditions. I think it's a radically brilliant modern storytelling. And so I think that rebellion and that kind of tension between our parents' traditions and what we were growing up immersed in as young people in Atlanta, in the public school system, amongst our peers and our community members, it lives very much also in our music. And we tend to lean back a little on the tunes. We tend to put a lot of real simple, kind of hooky, low-end bass behind a banjo, which is definitely not traditional. You know, that's a merging of worlds. And you know, sometimes we catch some slack for that on every side. People love tradition to be exactly as it is, or they want, you know, fusion to be a real particular way, but it's just naturally what we hear. We didn't choose one path or the other. We really grew up immersed in two totally different musical traditions, one through our parents and one through our peers. And they were both massively impactful to our sense of rhythm, to our sense of lyricism, to our sense of style, you know, and so I think it was a real interesting thing to kind of reclaim the traditions that are in our lineage, and also really pay homage to the contemporary traditions that were in our community and in our culture, on our modern culture. And I pay a big reverence to what has come out of the urban South as well.
Both of you traveled for a bit, including traveling to Mexico, specifically with a banjo. You had been immersed in community previously in Mexico, but Chloe joined you for that trip where you first brought the banjo. And you said, it's funny because I had to leave to realize I had a culture. And at first, Chloe thought you were crazy to bring this terrible instrument that you were trying to escape. But you said it kept calling me back, teaching me and leading me to new places in music. It was so cool to hear about how your mom kind of experienced this in Ireland, where she realized that she had culture back home. And then it kind of seems like the same thing happened to you. But why do you think Appalachian music allowed you to connect so deeply to new places? How did that realization change your relationship to it?
Yeah, that was a huge part of my life. I think of the whole thing in chapters, and I left my crazy, magical, peculiar family home that we've been talking about here when I was 18 in Georgia. And I moved to Latin America. I moved to southern Mexico, to a beautiful international community in San Cristobal de las Casas, which is a small town in the highlands of southern Mexico that was very immersed in activism and art and music, not so dissimilar to New Orleans in the sense that art was really being used as a piece of the revolution of the place. And I went as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 18-year-old girl. I had no idea how to count to 10 in Spanish. I didn't know anything about the rest of the world. All I knew was my little world of Atlanta, which is a big world in itself. But and everyone, as I began to learn Spanish, I spent about a year living there. Chloe didn't come there. She came and visited me, and we began to travel when she was a little bit older. But as I began to learn Spanish, all of the local Mexican and traveling community wanted to know, where are you from? Oh, you're from the United States. The stereotypes are instantly Hollywood, California, Los Angeles. That's it. Nobody had any broader idea, and politics. No one had any broader idea of some of the nuances of all these different American cultures that exist in North America. And so I started just like craving something that I could bring with me that would give me a way to tell a story, way to kind of communicate about some of the parts of my upbringing that were really similar to folkloric culture around the world, to the tribal cultures that you see in Central America, and very different than what you see in Hollywood, And so I went back and forth a few times in that year, and I came back with a banjo. No one has ever seen a banjo, and so it was this immediate talking piece where I would sit in the town square, and I couldn't really play very well. I was in the early stages of learning clawhammer, which is pretty clunky and awkward. But I was learning down there. I had some basic lessons and from my mother and a good friend, and I would just sit in the town square and play. And everyone would come up. Kids would come up. Old people would come up, and they would ask me what this is, where did it come from, and it became a talking piece. It helped me learn the language because I had to understand how to explain things in Spanish. And it gave me a sense of place. It gave me a sense of like, I'm not just here as a foreigner to kind of study and bear witness to this culture that's not mine. I'm also here as as my own troubadour, and I have a piece of culture that I want to travel with, that I want to talk about, that I want to share, where I can kind of bring parts of my story here, and it can be an exchange, which felt so valuable to me at that chapter, and still to this day, it felt so valuable to say, I want to be able to come to a place with an offering instead of just coming to be extracting. And that really was, I think, the beginning of my understanding of wanting music to be this tool of connection and communication and community, and not necessarily being interested in performance yet, but understanding like, this gives me a way to talk about where I come from and a way to travel, and not just be a spectator. And then Chloe, I stayed in Latin America for about 4 years. And Chloe came when she graduated from high school, which was some years later. And that is, you do have the shape of the story right. She came down, and then she started picking up little chops on the banjo, and then we started working on some 2-part harmony songs that we could sing at farmers markets when we were in Latin America, and then traveling again after that. And then she brought the fiddle, and we started these awful, rickety, wonderful renditions of old songs we learned from our mom. No one had ever heard fiddle and banjo, so it was just like this really quirky, ripe place to be trying these things out and kind of getting our handle on a folk music that no one had heard of. And we just felt like, okay, this is a little bit of our duty. We want to be able to tell these stories, and we want to carry these songs, so we've got to learn them.
You have been performing together with your sister for your whole life. You are very close.
We are very close.
There was a time where Chloe stopped traveling independently of you because you'd spent too much time apart. I read that somewhere. Yeah, very close. For you, how would you define your relationship with the other, and what is it like to make music with your sister versus others? It's
awesome. When we finish this interview, I'm driving to her house. I don't think we go 48 hours without seeing each other ever. We have been best friends forever since we were little. We have just enough difference in our personalities and just enough difference in our age that we've almost never been competitive, which I think we're both real grateful for. We just operate in really different ways, and we complement each other very well. And I feel like the primary magic of Rising Appalachia is that we're sisters, and one of us will carry the torch when the other one of us is tired, or one of us will have the inspiration when the other one of us is not clear, and that's sort of carried this big billowing project for years and years. And it feels like when we get together and we are able to dig in musically or creatively, there's just like an extra sparkle to it. We don't have to work at it really hard, that just there's something that kind of flows between us. And I think we're both it's not lost on us how special that is, and we have occasionally both pulled in different directions, and either creatively or in our own lives, but one of us will go one way, and then the other one will follow, and then the other one will go one way, and we've just worked really hard to stay in each other's sphere, because it's really special, I think, our dynamic. And now she's an amazing young mother. And so this is the first time in the history of our career where we're not touring together. She's on a little bit of a maternity leave, and we have an amazing, amazing woman that's learned all her parts. That's a dear, dear, dear friend of all of ours. And Chloe's stretching into this role of motherhood, and that's this whole other amazing blossoming chapter where I feel like I get to step into another role of our kind of growing family. So we're smitten. We're pretty smitten with each other.
The seed of activism in your music, it seems like some of it or all of it came from your dad, who said there's something more pressing and all-encompassing about the folks who speak to the bigger picture in terms of making music not just for music's sake, but for activist purposes, and that in being important. How naturally did you take to activism, and how hard is it to keep your energy for it in your music?
Great question. I do think we started as activists, both of us. I think actually our whole band started as activists. We tour now as a 5-piece, and each member has their own anchor in our story. And I think every one of us kind of came up in our youth pretty committed to some bigger picture conversations around land-based activism and human rights work and, prison equity and food justice. There's a lot to feel as somebody from this country when you start understanding equity and access and excess even. And I think everyone was paying attention and not happy about the state of the world. And activism, I think, was first. I think when Chloe and I first started, she was doing some work around land rights and redwood forest kind of protection out on the West Coast, and I was in Latin America, and I was doing a lot of learning and understanding of kind of the relationship between Latin America and the United States and indigenous rights and land-based rights, just kind of understanding all of those things. And as we started performing, like I was saying earlier in that part of the story, first it was just as this way to build relationship and way to show up not empty-handed. But then and then we were doing activism as a separate thing. Oh, then we'll go to the protest, we'll go to the front line, and then we started realizing, more people want to listen to song than they want to listen to speech, and it started merging, I think, naturally. And we realized, actually, we have the possibility of having more impact in this crazy spinning world by moving into music than we do moving into politics. And it feels much more joyful of a choice. And sometimes it's taken a lot of different positions. Sometimes the activism has felt really, really obvious, just like here is something that we do not. The song "Filthy Dirty South," for example, we wrote when we were living in New Orleans after the oil spill, and it was just clear as day. There is oil coming out. It's oil coming out your mouth, and you can't shut it down. You can't close it out. Yes, I love my filthy dirty South. It was like, there is an oil spill in the Gulf. We live here. We're Southern. It just comes, and it's such an extracted region. And it just felt like a really obvious way to steer those lyrics, like, please consider this beautiful breadbasket of a region that is known as the South of the United States, and look at what extractive resources are here, from the oil to the mountaintop removal, to the prison industrial system. It just felt like it was a bludgeoned region, which I still think is the case. I think now our relationship to issues has become more nuanced and has become more wide-reaching. And I think that's because the issues themselves have gotten more obscure. And I also think it's because our lyricism has changed form, and it feels like our relationship to activism and impact-based music almost has more now to do with calling people in and calling people towards each other, because it feels like the issues at hand amongst many are division and this crazy, chaotic kind of disconnection that has become the circumstance of American culture and social media and post-COVID if we can say post-COVID yet, the aftermath of what's been going on for the last many years has created this fractioning of people and fractioning of identity. And so now I think our music and the personality of its call to action is almost more of a recollecting, or calling the collective back in and trying to find spaces where we can actually all be on the same page, because there's so many places where everybody is ready to be fighting. And so that's changed form a lot. And I still think we're grappling with how we want to bring that into lyrics and how we want to dialogue about that. But I do think, in those years of COVID, when our whole entire livelihood was completely taken away, we realized how much joy and impact and importance it felt to be able to be in a room together with a whole bunch of people making music and singing and dancing. And for a while, we had just gotten tired and near to burnt out, like so many artists do with touring. And then we weren't able to for a couple of years. And it felt like, oh, a whole part of our duty is actually just to gather people together. That's like a whole part of our job and our responsibility,
From what I read about your band, purpose is very important to you. Can you talk about why that is and what the journey has looked like for you in terms of acknowledging and finding your purpose?
Yeah, quote my father, who's very hearty 80 years old this year. And he said, don't worry, you're never going to get the answer. It's like a constant kind of ebb and flow. So I think that is the case with us. We sort of find a piece of the story and a piece of our bigger kind of legacy, and we go in that direction, and then it gets blurry again for a little while, and we're like, oh, which way are we going? And then we kind of steer a little bit more, and I think that's going to probably be a long haul conversation for all of us. I did start a project many years ago called the Slow Music Movement. I just kind of coined it conceptually and then sent it out into the world to be a broader idea. And it's probably been coined by many people. But I think that a big part of our purpose is to continue to understand how to make music that feels culturally relevant in a way that also feels like it's paying homage to the older ways that music has been in our lives as humans for the last 2,000 years, which predates the stage by 700 years, however we want to get to that number. A very long time music has existed for us as part of our human identity before stage. And so we're really, really honored to be working musicians, and I think it's hopefully going to be our life forever, but finding all these ways to bring our music into the conversations and into the world in different ways, other than just your typical sort of tour life. And so sometimes that might mean that we're scoring music for a theater piece, or maybe we've toured many times by sailboat. It's one of the greatest joys of our lives. It's like, can't tell you what happens to the soul and the psyche when you go 6 miles an hour on the winds to get to your next gig, But that's kind of I think will be a conversation forever. How can we keep learning about how to show up as musicians and not get cornered into any particular way of doing it, but keep trying to show up well and creatively, really. So that gives us basically beyond a lifetime's worth of inquiry.
Yeah. I do have a question about the slow music movement, but first, of your career, I read that Leah and Chloe have followed invitation and intuition to independently forge their own path in terms of your musical career. And also something I noticed, your bio is different than other music bios I've read, and that there are no lists of awards or impressive achievements. There's more about where you came from and how you shaped your musicality, which I thought was an interesting observation. How do you approach those traditional industry milestones like awards, and what value do you place on gaining industry status as a band?
Great question. I've never noticed that about our bio. I don't know which bio you have either. Like every time I look, there's like 12 floating around, but I kind of like that.
On your website, just
okay, like that should be
on the old .com. Yeah.
Great. It's a great question. I mean, when we get nods from the industry, it feels like a feather in our cap, 100%. You know, it feels really nice to be taken seriously as musicians and as like working artists. But it's not our goal. It's not our, it's not our North Star by any means. We are consistently doing things that feel intuitive. And like you said, it has felt very invitation based. We're not out there crunching to try and rise to the top of anything. It has felt really important to Chloe and my leadership to sort of listen to where people are asking us to show up and where we're invited, and kind of follow that, as opposed to trying to talk some festival or some promoter into bringing us to their event. Sometimes we would really like to get invited to these events, and so perhaps they will happen, or it does happen organically. We've played at Red Rocks multiple times. There's nothing like it on earth. It's just one of the most legendary spaces ever. To just be on that stage, Telluride Bluegrass Festival we were invited to, and again, that was something that we had dreamed about for a very long time, and it just felt profoundly inspiring to be standing on that stage. So there are definitely huge marks in the music industry that feel really exciting to be part of, and will continue to feel exciting to be part of. But it's not what drives us. And we have a very small handful of folks that work with us from within the sort of typical music industry. And they all kind of know our style. We all sort of work together in this really interesting amorphous creature that is called Rising Appalachia, and help steer it accordingly. So it's a balance, it's been a balance forever, but we're driven by feeling like there is a reciprocal relationship, and that is really different than being driven by success. And I think it's kept us very integral in our creative process, even if it means that things are much slower or, much more fumbly than they might be if we just took the blueprint.
A little bit on the slow music movement. It came out of the desire to sustain the troubadour over participating in traditional touring, like the traditional touring musician industrial complex, if you want to call it that. You request local food in your rider. You will allow tabling for nonprofits. You create relationships with local community and alternative methods of transportation. You were mentioning sailboats. You toured by trains, smaller vehicles that use non-fossil fuels. You've done these hub shows where you stay for a few days and create relationships within the community. So how did the slow music movement and how did that method of touring and relationship building impact your feeling of home?
Oh, cool. Well, I do think home is tricky for the touring artist. Most of us all around the world probably struggle a little bit with a sense of home because you're kind of home amongst the people. I definitely think that we have deep familial relationship in several parts of the world that feel like family and chosen family and community from years and years of being together and immersed in each other's worlds and livelihoods. And I think sometimes we can feel, you can feel a little fractured perhaps in that space, because there are many places that feel like home, but also that is a blessing. And, I think at our very finest hour, we do feel at home in many places, and in many bioregions and in many zones.
So this is a kind of funny time to be talking about your festival, because as of this interview that we are doing right now, it hasn't happened yet, but it will have happened by the time this interview posts. So let's get into it. Okay, this July you hosted Catalyst, which seems like a huge undertaking, your first annual music, art, and education festival that takes place outside of Asheville, North Carolina. You curated 2 days of art, education, and music. In organizing this festival, as people who have played many festivals, what was important to you in terms of making it a good experience for everyone, the vendors, the artists, the participants?
Great. Yeah, you're right. We're like at the 9th hour right now, and by the time this goes live, it will have been finished. So fingers crossed it's going to be a radical success. But it is also part of the slow music movement in a way, which is that we've wanted to curate and design a gathering where a lot of the creative minds and the thinkers and the musicians and the teachers and the activists, we can kind of curate that and bring people into this wider world that we've been able to experience for the last many years. And so it is a piece of, it's kind of one part folk festival and one part kind of TEDx think tank and one part skills gathering. And it's a first year inaugural effort. So we didn't go too big, but it's been an astronomically large amount of work. And it feels really, really exciting to be able to be in these conversations again around sustainability and perhaps bringing a lot of what the slow music movement was founded on, which was around sustainable touring, to this notion that perhaps that sustainability and culture and performance and music could actually become place-based. And I think the potential is really, really vast for what that could mean and how that could impact local community and how that could impact our ability to really dig our heels into some of the bigger picture work that we love to stand behind with our music. So
what will your mom be doing at the festival?
She will be babysitting her first grandson. And if we were lucky, we would pull her on stage, but she's really shy and doesn't love to be pulled on stage and is elated to be in charge of her first grandson. His name is Kaleo. He'll be 5 months old. And our father will have a golf cart and he wants to help people park. That's the job he wants.
That is such a dad job.
Totally, right? He was like, give me a golf cart.
I'll park the cars. Okay, so let's talk about the new baby in the band, Chloe's son, Kaleo. You mentioned to me over emails that there is a big tour coming up in November. So how do you anticipate tours being different now, or will they be different because of young Sir?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a learning process. The November tour, the Catalyst, the festival, is the first show Chloe will be performing back at after maternity leave. And then our November tour is the first tour that she's going to be participating in. So it's probably going to be an emerging experience to be on tour with a little one. But Kaleo, our new family member, is a born and bona fide extrovert. So we think he's going to like the party more than his mom. And he just seems to really like to be in the limelight. So I think that it's going to be really cool to have a little one on the road. And also because we were raised so much in music festival culture of a different nature, much smaller and much more folkloric. But it feels very cool to now be third generation, banjo player.
So, Leah, before I let you go, will you do the lightning round?
Sure.
All right. This is going to be off the dome questions, answers is what we're looking for, and it'll be fun. Okay, here we go. Dogs or cats or something else?
Dogs, but only really wolfy ones.
Like a fuzzy dog?
No, just like I've always had these wonderful wolf mutts, and they're very autonomous, and they don't like jump on you or lick on you or chase tennis balls. They're a little bit more like
stoic,
kind of these stoic, wonderful, loyal creatures, and they're my ones.
What is your karaoke song?
Oh, I've only done karaoke once in my life, and I was terrible, but I think it was like Grease Lightning or something.
Nice. Oh, wow. That would be great to just do that on just one time. Just do it on stage. Mm-hmm. Everyone would love it. What is your coffee order?
I don't drink coffee. I only drink mate, the South American green tea, yerba mate. And
all right.
Right now, as you speak, there is a deer in my yard. Wow.
How big is this deer?
There is like a mid-sized buck, which means that my dog's going to go crazy. We might hear it, but at least we know it's, it's in good form.
We know it's happening.
Here. We know it's happening. He's looking at us.
What is a book that I should read?
Ooh. Well, I would have to shout out a dear mentor of ours, an amazing author named Martin Shaw, who has produced many books. One of my favorite is called Scatterlings, and it's all about folkloric reclamation of place through art and mythology. He is a bona fide nutball genius, and I love his work.
Amazing. What is the first piece of music that you bought? Like, what was the first album you bought with your own money?
Gosh, I think it was probably like Outkast's early Aquemini albums that came out in the 90s, and I would like wait at the CD store with my $8 or whatever and get them hot off the press between that and Ani DeFranco.
Nice. Oh, that's a perfect combo.
Right? Kind of just sort of announces what Rising Appalachia is right there.
Right. What is your favorite method of transportation?
Walking.
Oh, all right. Not sailboat?
No, I love walking is my favorite. And when I was sailing, I was like, I need to walk. I need to take a walk.
Oh, great. You can't walk very far on the sailboat. This is the last question. Where is the most beautiful place in the world?
Gosh, I'm quite partial to the area that we sailed, which was coastal British Columbia. It was really life-changing.
I am moving to Maine at the end of this year, and I'm thinking that Rising Appalachia should do a sailboat tour on the coast of Maine.
We did a sailboat tour on the coast of Maine, and we will do another.
Oh, heck yeah. Where?
Coastal Maine is amazing, and we toured on a 3-masted triple schooner called the Victory Chimes off of the coast of Rockport, Maine, and it was amazing. Go there.
Beautiful. Wow, beautiful. All right, I will catch the next one. Leah, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been a pleasure.
Such a pleasure. Thanks so much.
This episode of Basic Folk was produced by John Nungesser. Alex Stanton composes our music. Basic Folk is on the Bluegrass Situation Podcast Network. You can find all of our episodes there, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check us out on the SiriusXM app by searching for Basic Folk, or check out our website, basicfolk.com. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, send it to someone who might also enjoy that episode, like the guy who details your car and insists on shaking hands with you every time, and also lets you know that there's probably going to be like a $65 upcharge at the end of this because your small hatchback is actually considered a mid-size SUV. Maybe send it to that guy. He might like it. Okay, we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. Bye.